Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson. How are you today? I hope you all are doing fine. Do you know what we are going to learn today? Today's lesson is about narrative text. But before we learn narrative text, let's recap last week's lesson first. Last week's lesson is about tenses. There are different types of tenses that you have already learned, like present, past, present perfect, past perfect, and future. Those kind of tenses you will find in some texts. One of that texts you will learn today is about narrative text. Now that we have already recapped our last week's lesson, let's move on to today's lesson. Do you like to read stories? Have you read stories about Cinderella, Maling Kundang, The Ugly Duckling, or Batman? Well, those stories are some examples of narrative text. Now, let's get to know more about narrative text. Let's begin talk about narrative text. The first one, we have to know the definition of narrative text. What is definition of narrative text? Narrative text is a type of text in the form of an imaginary story, an engineered true story, or fairy tale. Narrative text tells a story that has chronological sequence of events that are interconnected. Itu artinya, maksudnya, si narrative text itu dia merupakan suatu jenis teks yang berupa cerita khayalan, kisah nyata yang direkayasa, atau dongeng. Narrative text menceritakan suatu cerita yang memiliki rangkaian peristiwa kronologis yang saling terhubung. Now, let's find out the purpose of narrative text. Of course, in every text has its own purpose. What is the purpose of narrative text? Is to amuse or to entertain the reader with a story. As we know, there are different types of narrative text. These are the types of narrative text: fable, superhero, folktale, fantasy, and legend. There are some language features of narrative text. Past tense, like killed, from the word kill, drunk, from the word drink, adverb of times like once upon a time, one day, etc. Time conjunction, when, then, suddenly. Specific character, the character of the story is specific, not general, like Cinderella, Snow White, Alibaba. And then the action verbs, a verb that shows an action like killed, dug, walked, all that about the activity that do by the participant in that story. And then the last, we can use direct speech. It is also to make story become lively. Snow White said, "My name is Snow White." The direct speech uses present tense. Okay, that's about the language features of narrative text. Well, after we know the definition of narrative text, the purpose of narrative text, and the types of narrative text, of course, we have to know the generic structure of narrative text to make it you easier when you write your own narrative text, or maybe you read the story in narrative text. There are 4 generic structure for narrative text. The first one is orientation, second one is complication, third one resolution, and the fourth one is coda. To make you more understand when you can use those generic structure in the text, I will give you the example of the text of narrative text about true friends that we'll read by Zalfa as the example of the narrative text. Okay, Zalfa, please read for us about the example narrative text true friends.
Once upon a time, there were two close friends who were walking through the forest together. They knew that anything dangerous can happen anytime in the forest, so they promised each other that they would always be together in any case of danger.
Just now we have already listened about the generic structure of orientation. What is orientation for the first paragraph in narrative text? Orientation is a set the scene where and when the story happen and introduces the participants of the story, who and what is involved in the story. Itu maksudnya pada paragraf pertama biasanya untuk sebuah naratif teks dia memperkenalkan tentang atau kapan, di mana cerita itu terjadi, dan juga menceritakan atau memperkenalkan tokoh-tokoh yang ada di cerita tersebut, siapanya dan seperti apa tokoh yang ada di cerita tersebut. Itu ada pada bagian orientation.
Suddenly, they saw a large bear getting closer towards them. One of them climbed a nearby tree at once, but unfortunately, the other one did not know how to climb up the tree. So being led by his common sense, he lay down on the ground, breathless, and pretended to be a dead man.
Now the story begins move into the conflict. So in this paragraph, we can call the generic structure of complication. What is complication? Complication tells the beginning of the problems, which leads to the crisis through climax of the main participants. Itu maksudnya di mana itu mulai cerita itu bergerak ke arah permasalahan pada cerita tersebut. Maka di bagian ini dan biasanya ada pada paragraf kedua pada sebuah naratif teks dinamakan sebagai generic structure of complication.
The bear came near the one who was lying on the ground. It smelled in his ears, and slowly left the place before the bears do not want to touch the dead creatures. After that, the friend on the tree came down and asked his friends that was on the ground, "Friend, what did the bear whisper into your ears?" The other friend replied, "Just now the bear advised me not to believe a false friend."
After complication, we come to the resolution for generic structure of narrative text. For resolution in narrative text, most of the time in the third paragraph, but sometimes maybe can in the fourth or fifth paragraph, according to the story, long or short story. In resolution itu artinya di mana kita mulai menceritakan permasalahan yang terjadi, pemecahan permasalahan yang terjadi pada cerita tersebut. Makanya dia dinamakan dengan resolusi atau resolution. Dan dia biasanya ada pada paragraf ketiga, tapi terkadang juga dia ada di paragraf keempat atau bahkan ke paragraf kelima, tergantung dari panjangnya cerita yang disampaikan.
Moral of the story: a true friend in need is a friend indeed.
So, after listening to the story, we know that this particular friend in this story isn't a good friend because the friend didn't help the other man who could not climb. That is why the bear gave the man on the ground a warning about what true friend is all about, in which the coda conclude as a friend in need is a friend indeed. This part in generic structure of narrative can called as coda. Coda adalah di mana pada paragraf terakhir sebuah naratif memberikan bagian yang terbaik atau di sisi positif pada cerita untuk pendengarnya atau untuk pembacanya yang bisa diambil atau bisa dipetik. Okay, that's all about generic structure of narrative text. Well, that's all for today's lesson. I hope all of you understand the concept of narrative text because I will give you exercise through Google Classroom. Send it before 11:30 p.m. today. I'll be waiting for your work. Have a nice day. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye.